There are many different card games, with many different mechanics, card types, and all sorts of things. But one probably universal constant between all of them is that they're turn-based. There may be timers at events and online, but ignoring that, you can take as long as you want to think things out. You make your moves, then your opponent makes their moves. For better or worse, it's an integral part of the greater genre. But some games are more turn-based than others. Let me explain. Traditional turn-based is something found in lots of things. Board games being the clearest example. Your turn you get to move, and if it's not your turn you don't get to move. But then we get into more of a gray area. Games where there's a person's turn, and they are here to do things, but there are also opportunities for other players to do some gameplay. The example I would give is something like Monopoly or Catan, where one player does have the initiative, but the rest can strategize and trade as well. Turn-based for sure, but it doesn't mean you just leave when it's not your turn. And in a game like Pokémon, still turn-based, it isn't a your turn, my turn game. Both of you take your turn at the same time, then check the outcome, getting a bit further away. And finally, we arrive at games that are turn-based, but you can still do things on your opponent's turn. It's their turn, but you can still do lots of things. The funny line of asking for response after every single card played or action taken. Response? 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 Of course, it's still their turn. They still have many more options than you do. They can do things first, or attack, or get access to their resources. And in games with this system, there are usually specific game pieces meant to be used on your opponent's turn. Things like counter spells and reactionary trap cards. It's an active choice to make that needs to be designed around. Now, I'm not here to argue which way this genre of game should be designed towards. Frankly, this type of mechanic is entirely subjective, and even I don't have a strong opinion leaning towards either side. I even enjoy games with both methods, enough where directly comparing them seems unnecessary. But I'm still gonna talk about it, not to come to a conclusion, but just because it's interesting. And it sure helps that out of the big three, and the online one I keep insisting on bringing up, 2 of them are entirely turn-based, and the other 2 have decent emphasis on playing on your opponent's turn. I'll give them names to make it easier to follow and less wordy. I'll call the ones where you can't do anything on your opponent's turn pure turn-based. Pure for short. And the ones where you can, hybrid. So let's start off with the pure turn-based and see what kind of advantages that type of game brings. The first thing I can think of is that this way of game design is very appealing to the casual audience. More casual players appreciate the ability to walk away from the game and not face any consequences for it. And we aren't in 2012 anymore, we don't need to demean and undermine mobile and casual gamers. Card games generally don't take too much mechanical skill to execute. And so, having a pure system makes it easier for players on the go to play a turn, put it away, and take it back out to play their next turn. I'm not claiming that just because a card game is purely turn-based, you don't need to pay attention on your opponent's turn. You certainly do. You need to track the cards in their hand, see what they've played and what they no longer have the opportunity to play, track what cards they're searching, and look at how they're trading onto the board. It's just not required to do so. The consequences aren't punishing enough to incentivize less invested players to keep focused on the game at all times. And for some people, that's a boon. They want to be able to look at other things or shift their attention every once in a while. It takes much less effort to watch a movie than it does to read a book.
Alright gang, whiplash.
Say that again?
But it's not like people enter a card game with the expectation of tuning out. There's usually a reason for players to start disassociating. And that's because in a purely turn-based system, you run the risk of long turns, which make players very bored. You're here to play a game, which means you want to be doing things. If you take too long looking at your opponent making decisions, playing cards, you start to question, what am I doing here? Nobody likes to wait around, which is why for this type of game, you really need to keep the turn speed in check. But again, gives the casual players a bit of slack, while not losing anything for the more serious players. But what about the other approach? What about the hybrid system? If you have things to do on your opponent's turn, then you theoretically always have to pay attention. If you aren't looking, then you might miss a counter or a trigger or a response. But that's all on paper because while these games are designed around interacting and playing on your opponent's turn, not every card is made to do so, and not every deck is guaranteed to have cards like these. Only specific cards give you the opportunity to play on your opponent's turn. In Yu-Gi-Oh! It's trap cards. Cards designed to do nothing on your turn while you set them up, and then can be activated on your opponent's turn. And in Magic, instants can be cast on your turn and your opponent's turn. And that's just the card mechanics that were explicitly designed for it. There's also hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! And lots of tap and activated effects in Magic. But again, not all cards are these cards, and not all decks run these cards. In practice, they do, because if you want to compete at a high level, you will need interaction, but not everyone plays at that level. And once you're at that level, the idea of the game boring you probably isn't the biggest deal anymore. Sorry, back on track. So unless you're running these specific cards, then you'll end up having the same problems that a pure system has as well. Use up your interaction early, now you're sitting there watching someone else play. But again, all of this is in theory, and once we sit down and start to play, this isn't even that much of an issue anymore. If you want a game to be built around interaction on your opponent's turn, the game speed needs to adjust to it. The game can't also be slow if both players are always doing things. It would be too frustrating. Probably. Yu-Gi-Oh! Turns are already infamous for taking way too long to finish. Now imagine if you didn't even have the opportunity to Astral Imperm or do anything to interrupt, or do anything during all of that time. So how much agency you have is partially due to luck. In this genre, sometimes you just don't draw anything. But it's also entirely up to your discretion. If you don't think that you have enough to do on your opponent's turn, put in more cards that do. The genre allows for enough expression in that regard. The game gives you the tools to control your own agency. But then we can also end up going into the other side of the spectrum. This certainly is completely subjective, but there can certainly be a case made for overstimulation. Too much to do and the casual player would get overwhelmed, turning them away from the genre. So when you do design a game, you need to strike a balance between the two. You need to make sure that the game isn't too slow so that players get bored from lack of action. And you need to make sure that there isn't too much going on that it takes away from the turn-based template that the genre is derived from. But if I'm gonna be frank, this balance is not very hard to hit, it's actually pretty easy. And this balance can be different for each individual player. I know many people that get much more frustrated than I do when their opponent ropes in Hearthstone. And I know that some people think that Deadlock has too much going on. And with the way the genre is designed, you potentially give the player so much freedom in where they want to be on this spectrum. But it doesn't mean the developers have no hand in how it's implemented. But the point here is, as developers, you need to carefully manage what you can do on your turn versus what you can't. You want to make sure that it is someone's turn and the game revolves around it. Unless you don't. The Pokémon system isn't one that seems worse than the ones we currently have. And while I don't like it, I don't think the turn only giving initiative and potential for attack is an objectively bad thing. And I think there is even room for card games that don't stick close to the turn-based format. But that's purely hypothetical. So what is there left to say? Well, if you're going to be pushing a casual format, especially to new players who have never played the genre before, suddenly you don't have as much leeway as you would with a format meant for competitive play. Despite the fact that casual formats are for fun, the standard is higher because you don't have the apathy of the pro players that are going to play anyway, unless you drastically mess up. And so, if you want to make a casual format, it can't be too complex, and more importantly, it can't have too much downtime. So when you introduce or even push multiplayer formats, as in more than just a 1 versus 1 format, you have to consider the changes that the format pushes. Waiting for one person is fine, but waiting for 3 people triples that time. And if you aren't running interaction for your opponent's turn, or run out of things to do, let's just say there's gonna be a lot of time before you can play a card. It's something that is not the best for player retention. But in practice, early turns are fast, and players do run interaction keeping everyone involved. And once we get to the later parts where turns are taking a long time, players have already been knocked out and aren't taking their turns. And just to play devil's advocate here, interaction is cool and fun, but it is almost never a win condition by itself. And most of the time it doesn't advance your win condition. And going 1 for 1 in a multiplayer format is much worse than going 1 for 1 in a 1 versus 1 format. And if you fill your deck with reactive pieces, you're stuck without proactive pieces. Interaction isn't perfect, but you still need to play it. But especially for casual formats, where the players aren't as engaged with the format, the game, and the game resources, the developers can't make players play the thing that fixes their problem. They can't force the players to mitigate the issue with deck building. So the point here is, Commander is magical when everything comes together, so play some damn interaction.